Our next reader is Michael Moorcock. Michael is a prolific British writer of science fiction, science fantasy, and literary fiction. At 16, he became editor of Tarzan Adventures, and as editor of New Worlds from 1964 to 1971, and again from 1976 to 1996. He encouraged the development of the new wave in Britain and indirectly in the United States. Since the 1980s, he has primarily written literary novels. His most recent book, The Vengeance of Rome, completes the Between the Mars tetralogy about events leading up to the Nazi Holocaust. In 2002, he was inducted into the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, and in 2004, he was awarded the Prix Utopialis, a French Lifetime Achievement Award. Would you welcome Michael Moorcock?
Still haven't decided which story. I think I'll see. Yeah, I'll read the slightly more fantastic story. I think I can find it. I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh no, that one's over there. Oh dear. Sorry, can I?
That's okay.
Got it. 61. I'm sorry about the message. This is a story called The Third Jungle Book, which I just wrote as a sort of little homage to a couple of characters who had entertained me a lot when I was a kid. The character these days, I think, is called Mowgli in the Disney movies, but I grew up knowing him as Mowgli, which I'm sure was a mispronunciation, but nonetheless, that's what everybody called him when I was a kid, so I'm going to call him that too. I'll just read until people throw sticks and fruit, or when we're running out of time. I'm not sure how I would do. Anyway, here I go. On the death of his friend Baloo, the last of his old jungle companions, who thought him immortal, Mowgli emigrated to London and took his bar exams. Thanks to a distinguished legal career representing the public interest, he was now Sir Sanjit J. Ray, respected independent member of Parliament for Southall South in London. His children had grown and were now doing well in America and Australia. Occasionally, however, he grew tired of civilized life and longed for the companions he'd known as a boy in his Highland Indian forest. It is a sad day, he said to himself, when the last of one's old family and friends is gone to the great tree above, and a little frog, however happily married, is left with no one who shares and understands his experience. O Mother Wolf, O Father Wolf, O Akila, O Baloo, O Bagheera, how I miss thee, my mother, my father, my chief, and my brothers. How I mourn for thee and long for the silence and the voices, the companionship of the forest. Whereupon he would lift his noble head and utter a low, pathetic howl of a kind which once issued from Sister Wolf, who had died so unhappily in Regent's Park Zoological Gardens many, many years before, when he had lacked the influence to have her freed from captivity. At last came the moment of decision. Sir Sanjit divested himself of his pyjamas while his wife slept, and, clad only in his underpants, crept from his window high above the traffic to run swiftly over the West London rooftops, where he eventually met a family of foxes, whose yapping, panting language was easily learned, since it was cousin to that of the wolves, who had first been his friends and relatives. His scent, moreover, was reassuring to them, and soon he was speaking of Akela, the great pack leader, of Mother Wolf, who had known his potential as a killer, of Shere Khan, the tiger. He spoke of Kaa, the python, and all the others who had taught him how to survive and triumph, and told tales of the faraway jungle, which somehow reminded the foxes of their own home amongst the alleys, rooftops, and underground places of London. Recognizing Mowgli's sorrow, a young matron known as Makabar, with beautiful, unusually lustrous red hair, found herself comforting him. She had seen her first cubs emigrate up the Central line. Oh, there it goes. Okay, excuse me. Hang on to this. Thanks. Underground to seek their fortunes in the wealthy suburbs of Notting Hill and Bayswater, home to both Holland and Hyde Parks. Her mate had been killed a year while crossing the M4 motorway to investigate a newly opened curry restaurant. "Oh, beloved Mowgli," she said, "how I've longed to know the minds of the big frogs who dwell in this city. Why, for instance, do they appear to tolerate, even welcome our presence amongst them, when their brethren of the country live only to hunt and to kill us?" Sir Sanjit thought the folk of the country might be less civilized and so have less to occupy their minds than the city dwellers. But it could also be something to do with the keeping of domestic fowl, which is more commonly practiced in rural areas. In the city, the myth that foxes who habitually avoided conflict with cats and dogs caught and ate household animals had long since been contradicted by experience. And though sometimes given to phases of mysterious xenophobia, city people are generally far better at absorbing new experience. Moreover, he thought, there was a greater tolerance, an attitude of live and let live in the city, where a more varied collection of human beings rubbed shoulders. And finally, you could add to that the fact that the people of the city were rather proud of their foxes, which helped, among other things, to keep the city clean and free of vermin. Because fox hunted at night, they were generally only visible during the day when sunning themselves on roofs or educating their children. All this made considerable sense to Makabar, who was satisfied by Mowgli's answers, and next asked him to tell tales of the Indian jungle, most of which can already be found in the accounts of Mr. Rudyard Kipling, known as the Jungle Book and the Second Jungle Book. Makabar and her people, of course, had not encountered these stories, since they did not read the little bugs, as they called the printed word, and had eyes which found it hard to focus on the TV screens, which occasionally showed a rather stylized and sentimental account of Mowgli's adventures. Nor did the mumbling language of the big frogs mean much to them. Excuse me. They were eager to hear Mowgli's many explanations and interpretations. In return, they told him that they knew of the nocturnal goings-on in his own and neighbouring constituencies. They knew which big frogs seemed in need, which falsified their need, who seemed to be stealing, and so on. They knew who was abusing domestic animals, or indeed hurting their own kind. By and by, Mowgli built up a picture of his part of the city, which, though unusual in its perspectives, was second to none. This proved very useful to Sir Sanjit in Parliament, when certain issues were debated. For the next few years, Mowgli nocturnally ranged the jungle, which was the city he had made his own. Occasionally he was glimpsed by his fellow big frogs, and became part of London's rich mythology. As well as the foxes, with whom he enjoyed the old familiar communion of the pack, he came to know the wily cats, some of whom were of a size almost that of a small tiger, and who remained hidden during the day. Again, their language was not difficult for him to learn, and they too told him much he would never otherwise have known, as did the feral and the domestic dogs. He even learned the simple speech of owls and nighthawks, until he became as familiar and comfortable with this habitat as he had been with that Indian forest of his childhood, now a fond memory. For in common with many humans raised in the wild, Mowgli enjoyed extraordinary longevity.